There are people who walk through life differently, not louder, not prouder, just different. They notice things, the way light falls through windows at certain hours, the pause between someone's words and what they actually mean, the weight of a room when everyone pretends everything is fine. These people don't seek these observations, they simply cannot unsee them. And in that inability to turn away lies both their gift and their burden. You've probably met someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this, someone who feels the undercurrents of every conversation, who senses the unspoken tensions at the dinner table, who knows when a smile is genuine and when it's a mask worn to survive the day. This awareness seems like wisdom at first. It seems like depth. But there comes a moment, and it always comes, when you realize that seeing clearly isn't the same as living freely. That knowing more doesn't always mean living better. That consciousness, when unguarded, can become a prison with transparent walls. Martin Heidegger once wrote about being, not just existing but truly being in the world. He spoke of authenticity, of living awake rather than lost in the crowd's sleep. But he also understood something most people miss, that awakening is dangerous. Not because the truth is unbearable, though sometimes it is, but because once you wake up, you stand alone in ways that hurt. You see patterns where others see coincidences. You feel the machinery of society grinding while others dance to its rhythm. And in that solitude, in that vast space between your awareness and everyone else's comfortable dreams, you must learn to protect yourself. Not from the world, exactly, from the consequences of being awake in it. There are secrets you learn when you become conscious, not secrets in the sense of hidden knowledge or mystical revelations, secrets in the sense of truths you discover about yourself and the world that you must guard carefully. Because sharing them doesn't enlighten others, it isolates you further. Because speaking them aloud doesn't create connection, it creates distance. These are the secrets that awake people carry quietly, like smooth stones in their pockets, touched in private moments but never displayed. The first secret is this: most people don't want to wake up. They say they do. They talk about growth and truth and authenticity. They share quotes about consciousness and post about mindfulness. But when you actually offer them the mirror, when you reflect back what they're avoiding, when you name the pattern they're trapped in, they recoil. Not always obviously. Sometimes it's subtle. A change in their eyes, a shift in their voice, a sudden need to change the subject or check their phone or remember something they have to do. You learn this the hard way. You think you're helping by pointing out what you see. Someone's relationship is clearly dying and they keep pretending it's just going through a rough patch. Someone's job is consuming them and they keep calling it dedication. Someone's fear is running their entire life, and they keep describing it as caution. You see it so clearly, how could they not? So you speak. Gently, carefully, with love. And you watch them shut down. Not because what you said was wrong, because it was right. Because waking someone up before they're ready doesn't lead to gratitude. It leads to resentment. They don't thank you for showing them their cage. They blame you for making them see the bars. Once you understand this, truly understand it deep in your bones, you stop trying to wake people up, not out of arrogance or superiority, out of respect, out of recognition that everyone has their own timing, their own journey, their own readiness. You learn to watch people sleep without feeling compelled to shake them. You learn that your awareness of their patterns doesn't obligate you to intervene. This restraint, this knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, becomes a kind of wisdom that consciousness demands. It's not about keeping secrets to feel special or superior. It's about understanding that some truths people must discover alone, in their own time, through their own experience. Your seeing it doesn't make it your responsibility to fix it. The second secret is darker. The more awake you become, the lonelier you get. Not the loneliness of physical isolation. You can be surrounded by people and still feel it. It's the loneliness of recognition without reflection. of seeing something profound and having no one to confirm that you're not crazy for seeing it, of experiencing depth while everyone around you skims the surface, of wanting to discuss the architecture of existence while conversations stay safely trapped in weather and weekend plans and the latest series everyone's watching. Heidegger called this thrownness, the sense of being thrown into a world you didn't choose, among people who don't question what you cannot stop questioning. And when you wake up, this thrownness intensifies. Because now you're not just thrown into the world, you're thrown into consciousness in a world that mostly prefers sleep. You start to understand why so many philosophers seemed melancholic, why so many mystics retreated to mountains, why so many aware people carry a certain sadness behind their eyes. It's not depression exactly. It's the weight of seeing paired with the ache of not being seen, of knowing paired with the impossibility of sharing what you know in a way that translates. You learn to smile through conversations that bore you, to nod through advice that misses the point entirely, to let people think they understand you when they understand only the version of you that fits their comprehension. This isn't dishonesty. It's survival. It's understanding that you cannot drag people into depths they're not equipped to handle. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them believe their shallow waters are the whole ocean. And yes, it's lonely, profoundly lonely, but it's a loneliness you learn to befriend. Because the alternative, constantly trying to explain your inner world to people who don't have the language for it, is more exhausting than the solitude. And here's what most people won't tell you. Sometimes you envy the sleepers. Honestly, deeply envy them. They seem happier, they seem lighter. They can watch the news without feeling the collective weight of humanity's patterns. They can have conversations without analyzing every subtext. They can love without seeing all the ways love might fail. They can hope without immediately calculating the odds of disappointment. There are moments, and if you're honest, you know these moments, when you wish you could go back, when you wish you could unsee what you've seen, unknow what you know, return to the simpler interpretations of life you once held. But you can't. Consciousness doesn't work backwards. Once you see through the illusion, you can't make it solid again. Once you taste authentic being, the inauthentic becomes intolerable. This is the irreversible nature of awakening. And so you carry this secret too, that being awake is sometimes painful, sometimes exhausting, sometimes so lonely it hurts. But you wouldn't choose sleep again even if you could. Not because awakening made you happy, it didn't promise happiness, but because it made you real. Because living consciously, even with all its weight, feels more true than living comfortably numb. And that truth, that realness, becomes more valuable than ease. The third secret goes even deeper. You realize that most human suffering is optional. Not all suffering. Grief is real. Loss is real. Pain is real. But most of the anguish people experience daily is self-created. The anxiety about what others think. The resentment from comparing their lives to others. The stress from chasing goals they don't actually want. The exhaustion from maintaining personas they don't even like. You see this everywhere once you're awake. You see people torturing themselves with thoughts, drowning in narratives they've constructed, trapped in identities they're terrified to release. And you cannot share this observation, because when someone is suffering, telling them their suffering is optional sounds cruel. It sounds dismissive, like you're minimizing their pain or implying they're choosing to hurt. But that's not what you mean. You mean that underneath their stories, underneath their interpretations, underneath their identification with their pain, there's a freedom they can't see yet, a space where suffering doesn't live. Not because life gets easy, but because they stop fighting what is. They stop arguing with reality. They stop insisting the world should be different than it is. Heidegger wrote about this kind of letting be, Gelassenheit, he called it, a releasement, a way of being with what is without constantly trying to control, fix, or change it. It's not passivity. It's not giving up. It's something subtler. It's recognizing that most of your suffering comes not from what happens, but from your resistance to what happens. From your insistence that life should unfold according to your preferences. From your attachment to outcomes you cannot control. When you wake up to this, really wake up, you see people exhausting themselves, fighting unwinnable wars, and your heart breaks for them. But you also know that you can't gift them this understanding. They'll call it cold. They'll say you don't care. They'll accuse you of being detached or unfeeling, when actually you feel everything. You just don't believe your feelings about reality change reality. So you stay quiet. You listen to people's suffering with compassion. You hold space for their pain. But you don't try to convince them that most of their pain is a story they're telling themselves, because they're not ready to hear it. And trying to wake someone from their suffering before they're ready doesn't ease their pain. It makes them defensive. It makes them cling tighter to their story, because now they have to defend it. Now they have to prove their suffering is legitimate, necessary, beyond their control. You learn that real compassion sometimes means letting people suffer until they're ready to question their own suffering, until they're tired enough of the pattern to look at what's creating it. The fourth secret is this. You stop needing the world to validate your reality. This sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. Most people live in constant negotiation with consensus. They need others to agree that what they're experiencing is real, significant, valid. They need their feelings acknowledged, their perspectives confirmed, their interpretations validated. And when others don't mirror back what they're experiencing, they either change themselves to fit the consensus or exhaust themselves trying to make others see what they see. It's an endless, draining loop. The need to be understood becomes a prison. But when you truly wake up, something shifts. You begin to trust your own perception, even when it contradicts everyone else's, not arrogantly, not with certainty that you're always right, but with a quiet confidence that your experience is real, even if no one else sees it, even if no one can verify it, even if describing it makes people look at you strangely. You no longer need permission to see what you see. You no longer need others to confirm that what you're sensing is actually there. This is profoundly liberating and profoundly isolating, because now you're truly alone with your consciousness. Not lonely necessarily, but alone. Singular, responsible for your own reality in a way most people never are. You stop trying to convince others of what you know. You stop seeking validation for your insights. You stop needing people to understand the depths you've explored. Instead, you simply live from that understanding. You let your awareness inform your choices without broadcasting it. You let your consciousness guide your path without explaining every step. This secret, this independence from consensus reality, is perhaps the most important thing awake people learn, and the most impossible to share. Because the moment you try to explain it, you're seeking the very validation you've learned to live without. You're contradicting the freedom you've found by asking others to confirm it, so you simply embody it, quietly, privately, knowing that your experience doesn't require an audience to be real. There's a peace that comes with this, a deep, unshakable peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, because you're no longer waiting for the world to align with your understanding. You're no longer exhausting yourself trying to make others see what you see. You're no longer measuring your consciousness against others' comprehension of it. You exist, you perceive, you know. And that knowing doesn't need applause or agreement. It needs nothing but your own acknowledgement. This is freedom, not the freedom to do whatever you want. The freedom to be fully yourself, even when that self doesn't make sense to anyone else. And the fifth secret, the one that encompasses all others, you discover that awakening isn't a destination. It's not a state you achieve and then maintain. It's a continuous practice of returning. Returning to presence, returning to authenticity, returning to awareness. You'll forget. You'll get lost in the world's stories again. You'll fall back into old patterns, old fears, old ways of being. And that's not failure. That's the nature of consciousness. It's a spiral, not a ladder. You revisit the same territory at deeper levels. You forget and remember in an endless dance between sleep and wakefulness. Heidegger knew this. He knew that being isn't something you master once. It's something you attend to moment by moment, day by day, forever. There's no graduation from consciousness, no point where you've arrived and can stop practicing. The awake person isn't someone who never sleeps anymore. The awake person is someone who notices when they've fallen asleep and gently, without judgment, opens their eyes again. Who catches themselves lost in reaction and returns to response. Who feels themselves contracting and consciously relaxes. Who sees themselves performing and remembers authenticity. This is exhausting some days. On some days, you're tired of being aware, tired of witnessing yourself, tired of the constant returning to presence. You want to just be, without all this consciousness about being. And that's okay. That's human. You're allowed to be tired of awakening. You're allowed to take breaks, to let yourself drift, to not be so intensely aware every moment. This is part of the practice too. Knowing when to ease up, when to soften, when to let yourself simply exist without all the witnessing. But you cannot share this with most people because they're still seeking arrival. They still think awakening is a destination where everything becomes clear and stays clear forever, where you reach enlightenment and never struggle again, where consciousness solves all problems. And you know that's not true. You know awakening often creates new challenges, new kinds of loneliness, new forms of difficulty. It doesn't make life easier. It makes life realer, more vivid, more intense. Both the beauty and the pain become sharper when you're awake to experience them fully. And you can't explain this to someone who's still chasing awakening as an escape from their current experience. They need to believe it will save them. And maybe that belief is what gets them started. So you let them believe it. You don't burst their bubble with your knowledge that awakening is as difficult as it is beautiful. That consciousness demands everything and promises nothing except the truth. You learn to protect these secrets not because they're sacred mysteries, but because they're truths that only make sense once you've lived them. Hearing them before you're ready doesn't help. It confuses, or worse, it makes you think you understand something you haven't actually experienced. You've met these people, the ones who talk about consciousness but live mechanically, who share quotes about awakening but react unconsciously to everything, who claim to be awake but are just performing wakefulness for an audience. They have the language but not the living. They've heard the secrets, but haven't earned them through their own darkness, their own struggle, their own genuine transformation. And this is why awake people often seem quiet, not because they're withholding, because they've learned that some things can't be taught, only discovered. Some truths can't be shared, only lived into. Some understanding can't be transferred, only earned through direct experience. They've learned that their job isn't to wake others up, it's to stay awake themselves, to live authentically in a world that rewards performance, to remain conscious in a society that profits from sleep, to keep returning to presence when everything pulls them toward distraction. This is enough. This is the work. You start to understand that your consciousness isn't about others at all. It's not your role to enlighten the sleeping. It's not your responsibility to shake people from their dreams. Your consciousness is your own journey, your own practice, your own continuous returning to truth. And if your way of being awake inspires others, if your authenticity gives others permission to explore their own, if your presence creates space for others to question their patterns, beautiful. But that's not why you do it. You do it because once you've tasted being real, everything else feels like death. You do it because consciousness, for all its difficulty, is the only life worth living. You do it because you've seen through the game and can't pretend to still be a player. There's a strange kind of strength that comes from carrying these secrets, from knowing things you cannot share, from seeing things you cannot explain, from living in dimensions others don't know exist. It's not the strength of power or control. It's the strength of solitude, of self-reliance, of not needing external validation for internal experience. It's the strength of someone who has walked through their own darkness and emerged not unscathed, but authentic, not perfect, but present, not enlightened in some mystical sense, but awake to their own being in a way that can't be undone. And slowly, quietly, something beautiful happens. You stop feeling lonely in your awareness, not because you find others who understand, though sometimes you do, and those connections are precious beyond words, but because you befriend your own consciousness. You stop seeing your awareness as a burden and start experiencing it as a companion. The part of you that sees becomes intimate with the part of you that lives. You're no longer split between the witness and the participant. You're both, fully, simultaneously. Present to your own experience while also aware of it. Engaged with life while also conscious of your engagement. This integration is the real awakening. Not seeing more, but being more fully with what you see. You learn to move through the world differently. Not performing wakefulness, but living it. Not explaining consciousness, but embodying it. You make choices that make sense to you even when they perplex others. You set boundaries that protect your energy, even when they disappoint people. You pursue depth, even when the world offers you shiny surfaces. You choose silence over empty words. Solitude over draining company. Truth over comfort. Not because you're special or superior, because you can't do otherwise anymore. Because once you've tasted authentic being, everything else makes you sick. And here's what you discover in the quietness of your own awareness. You don't need to share the secrets. Living them is enough. Being them is enough. The world doesn't need more people talking about consciousness. It needs more people living consciously. More people choosing presence over distraction. More people practicing authenticity over performance. More people brave enough to stand in their truth even when that truth is lonely, even when that truth doesn't impress anyone, even when that truth brings no rewards except the deep, quiet satisfaction of being real. This is what Heidegger meant by authentic existence. Not some grand achievement, not some mystical state, just the simple, difficult, beautiful practice of being true to your own being, of not losing yourself in the crowd, of not drowning in the they, the anonymous mass of public opinion and social expectation, of standing in your own experience, your own awareness, your own consciousness, regardless of whether anyone else understands or approves. This is the real secret, not something you learn, something you become, something you choose, every day, every moment, again and again, forever. So you walk through the world carrying what you know, seeing what you see, feeling what you feel, not announcing it, not defending it, not needing it acknowledged, just living from that place of awareness as best you can, stumbling sometimes, forgetting sometimes, returning always to presence, to truth, to consciousness. To your own authentic being in a world that constantly invites you to be anything but authentic. This is the work, this is the way, this is what it means to be awake, not perfect, not enlightened, just honest, just present, just real, just you, fully, finally, freely. In each moment you remember to return to yourself. In each breath you choose consciousness over comfort. In each choice you make that honors your truth rather than others' expectations. This is enough. You are enough. The awareness itself is enough. Everything else is just noise. Everything else is just the world sleeping, dreaming, forgetting what you now remember. And you let it. You let the world be what it is. You let people sleep as long as they need to. You let yourself be awake. Quietly. Privately, powerfully, in the only life you'll ever have. This one, now, here, always now, always here, always this moment of consciousness choosing itself. Again, and again, and again.